Hello, esteemed audience, distinguished guests, and healthcare enthusiasts. Welcome to episode 14 of our Decoding AI in Healthcare series. I am Dr. Harshita Gupta, your host, and I am thrilled to introduce our esteemed panel of experts. To kick off our discussion, let me introduce our first guest, Richie Etwaru. He is an executive, entrepreneur, and inventor with over 20 years of experience partnering with boards and C suites on turnarounds and transformations. He integrates strategy, leadership, and new frontier technologies to drive sustainable, disproportionate growth. His breakthroughs include the 0 to 1 invention of software only spatial computing using machine learning and computer vision to reshape the AR and VR and extended reality marketplace. He is also pioneered the groundbreaking concept of 31st human right using natural language processing and neural networks to reshape the data privacy marketplace. Welcome, Richie.
Nice to have you. I got to shorten that. It gets embarrassing.
Thank you. And next we have Emanuel Mkrtichian. He's a seasoned healthcare technology executive with over 20 years of experience, known for his work on mergers, acquisition, and digital transformations in healthcare delivery and management. He has contributed strategy and thought leadership at the US federal level, notably with CMS in developing the Medicaid information technology architecture, a key framework for modernizing Medicaid services adopted by all states. His expertise extends to implementing electronic medical records systems in both US and the European Union, including major projects with Cerner and Epic Systems in California and Beverly Hills, Hollywood, respectively. He's a, he's a published author with articles in prestigious medical journals and white papers on technology topics such as interoperability and security. Currently, he leads Blue Zone's global partners in Amsterdam and is the founder and CEO of Telemedics LLC, focusing on developing a GDPR and HIPAA compliant global Web3 blockchain security and AI telehealth platform that offers AI driven personal health monitoring and secure portable medical data records for individuals. Welcome, Emanuel.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with such prominent guests. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have once again Dr. Dipu Patel, a digital health consultant, with us today. Dr. Dipu's expertise lies in her unique blend of clinical insights and profound understanding of technology's role in enhancing patient education and advocacy. Her belief that even technology and education evolve, the human touch in healthcare remains irreplaceable. Welcome, Dipu.
Thank you so much, Harshita. Thank you so much to our guests, Richie, Emanuel. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I think we're all going to have a very enlightening conversation today on, I think, the buzzword of the last, I would say, 5 years. Before that, I don't think anybody would have heard of blockchain. So you are going to enlighten us on what blockchain is and how it's going to impact healthcare, specifically through the lens of AI. And as we know, we've heard of blockchain in other contexts that are unrelated to healthcare for its various uses, including supply chain management and fraud protection and reduction and enhancing privacy and security along those lines. But let's dive right into it. And for those in our audience not familiar with blockchain technology, can you explain what it is and some examples of how it's being used? We'll start with non-healthcare examples to kind of set the stage for that discussion. We'll start with you, Richie, and we can kind of go from there.
Again, thank you so much for having me, and hello, everyone. We'll try to keep this as interesting as possible. So I think the way to think about blockchain is we'll start in a pyramid, sort of like the simplest description, and then maybe just a little bit more detailed, and then maybe slightly more engaging. So the simplest description is that it is a database where anything that you do to it has a history. So when you look at databases that we have today, if I deleted a record or I changed a record, one could remove that history, meaning I could change something from red to blue, and you wouldn't know that 2 days ago it was red. Now, there are mechanisms to do that in traditional databases, but they're not a native part of the database design. With the blockchain database, that is natively a part of the database design. Any changes is called what is called immutable, meaning that you can't really go back and remove it. Now, the reason why that is even stronger as far as blockchains are set up, above and beyond just the native design of the database itself, is because there is no such thing as a blockchain. There are usually networks of nodes that make up blockchains. And so what happens is that there are multiple databases that are blockchain databases that stay in tandem with each other, meaning they update whenever they're updated at the same time. So even if someone were to somehow break the native design of the structure, where they go back and delete the fact that this blue was red yesterday, every other node, and so these databases are called nodes on the network, would still have a record that, hey, you know what, it was red yesterday. And so then there are things around consensus, which is, well, if one node is saying that it wasn't red yesterday and the other 99 nodes are saying it was red yesterday, you know what, it was probably red yesterday. So that's the second layer. And then third is sort of the use cases. Generally, you use blockchains between counterparties that may not share the same values or priorities or accountability. So there's really no such thing as like a blockchain project within a single industry. While there is, it's the usability of it, or the squeeze that you get out of it is usually not that great because it's insular to a single organization. You don't have competing parties that may want to change the data or may have reasons to keep it sort of out of sync. And besides, you can accomplish that within an organization with traditional databases. Blockchains become very, very, very useful and powerful when you have multiple parties that may not share the same organizational structure, the same values, the same priorities, the same goals, that need to trade with data, and they need to trade with a single, most truthful, golden copy of that data. So it manages the trust between different parties to be able to use the most likely valid version of a data in place. So that's the pyramid. Hopefully that orients us into the discussion. I'm happy to embellish more as needed.
Yeah, no, and I think you've kind of hit a lot of the parameters of what blockchain really, the framework of blockchain really means, which is the transparency, the immutability, and the security, all of which actually parlay right nicely into my next question, Emanuel, for you around how do you think blockchain is impacting the healthcare industry, and where do you see, particularly, I guess, in the areas of data security and interoperability?
Well, I've been involved in systems integration for a very long time, and gone through all the how should I say, different renditions of how to connect institutions, share data among different health organizations, and so on. And a long time ago, we went through what was called with middleware, EAI, Enterprise Application Integration. So the integrations were primarily on the application side. I was never really happy with that because that's really a small part of the world in healthcare, aside from applications. And I was more interested in the federated, meaning that there wasn't really a point-to-point integration or sharing of the data, because those are actually very, very expensive interfaces or connections to implement. And I remember in my consulting days having to do assessments for large organizations. And for each interface, the cost would be anywhere from 30,000 to 100,000, which is ridiculous. And so it's no wonder that healthcare technology, especially on the integration side, which essentially means you're trying to share data to do business transactions, to do quality assurance. I mean, all sorts of metrics that you want to measure. And so when I first learned about blockchain or Bitcoin, I actually looked at the network potential more than the currency. And I told lots of my colleagues who were really jumping into Bitcoin, and it's interesting today, it hit 65,000. I'm still more fascinated with the decentralized capabilities. And as Richie outlined, there's really no, the brokering and the complexity that was involved with trying to share data from organization to organization was very quite regional and very limited. And the decentralized aspects of blockchain is more global. So it's not only going to have a major impact on healthcare in the United States, for example. This will be a global phenomenon that will ultimately move on. And a lot of countries are now looking at using blockchain, for example, in conjunction with AI and what's referred to as RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. That's a very fancy term meaning, well, we should probably discuss that in a little more detail, why that's happening. But this was a technology that was developed by Facebook or Meta.
Yeah.
And essentially, it admits the weaknesses of the ChatGPT capabilities and more fine tunes the capabilities of artificial intelligence to avoid hallucinations and things like that. We can explain that later.
But by all means, actually, Richie, if you want to elaborate on that, that would be great. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I want to point out for our audience who may not be familiar with the technological aspects of blockchain is that there are several features of it that really make it very amenable to healthcare data. First is the security and the privacy component, which Emanuel mentioned, and Richie, you mentioned earlier as well, but also the transparency aspect. One of the concepts that I find very interesting is that currently we are in a very centralized database kind of mode, whereas blockchain kind of decentralizes it, which seems counter to what we would need for healthcare data, but it actually puts healthcare data in the hands of the patient rather than the entity or the organization. And I think, Emanuel, I think you're touching on those bits and pieces of how decentralization of data can actually aid in moving forward and giving patients more control of their data.
Yeah. Right, and I think that's an important aspect to essentially be able to provide individuals, patients, or digital twin, in other words, their data that they will own, control, and be able to share or even sell to various organizations at will, including pharmaceuticals, research organizations, and so on. I don't want to interfere with Richie's comment, so I'll just hold it at that.
Go ahead, Richie.
Well, I think so. Let's parse. Emanuel laid out some pretty important broad statements, and I think it's useful for the audience to parse sort of the utility of the concepts. So, in order of priority, I think that when it comes to data integration or data sharing or interoperability, to me, the challenge there for adoption has never really been the sophistication of the technology. It's been the motivation of the various parties to share data. And data is a part of the balance sheet. Data is an asset of an organization, no different from the IP of the organization. And so the motivations and the alignment of those motivations to form data alliances, so to speak, is just not always there. And so even if we were to have a data design protocol that is, beyond blockchain in the areas of privacy, trust, security, transparency, I don't know that we would have the outcomes that we're looking for simply because of the lack of motivation and alignment. And a lot of times regulation forces that. Like in the US, there's been several regulations that now encourages, if not forces, the EMRs to start to share data. Right. The second is, I think that a lot of times in all industries, and maybe in healthcare more than others, there's a lack of focus on adoption. And I think about from a CapEx, OpEx perspective, where someone will be doing some sort of technology-based transformation or investment, and they will invest in the CapEx to be able to get the project done, to be able to get to rollout, but then not the OpEx to deal with adoption. Sometimes we focus too much on innovation and not enough on adoption. And so those types of nuances around thinking about data and the future of data, to me, are equally as important as the sophistication of underlying technology to solve the problem. Right. And I think as we're having a broad discussion, we should think about that. As we evolve to sort of the second topic around artificial intelligence, what I would argue is that when we think about big data and, let's say, interoperable data today, okay, let's just call it that. The value was just never there to come from data. The most sophisticated forms of application of value that comes from data might be a real-time notification of something interesting, right? We started with sort of like business intelligence dashboards, right? And then notifications. In practice, that doesn't deliver enough for consumers or professionals or businesses. A lot of what BI is just a better representation of what you already know, right? A cleaner, more sophisticated layout. A lot of what real-time insights is stuff that you didn't know, but you don't really need to know. A lot of it is over notification, and many of it, even if it's useful, it's not in the moment of truth. It's not in the moment when you need it. And very rarely do we get to the things that you didn't know, especially if we can give it to you at the time that you need it. And so with the evolution of the various types of models of artificial intelligence, language models are very interesting, but they are much more sophisticated models than language models that have been around for a longer time. Now, finally, we see a reason to be able to bring data together, because better data generates disproportionate intelligence, which starts to lean into that thing where I can offer you things that you didn't know that you didn't know. And if I could get it to you in the moment of need, that would be incredibly valuable. And so I see these intelligence alliances as getting better and better and more important now. And the thing about artificial intelligence that I think everybody should kind of walk away with is traditionally we had the phrase of garbage in, garbage out. AI is a little bit different. You can have garbage in and still get gold out. And so much more data sets that were once useless can now become useful in the world of artificial intelligence. And second is, in order to drive really, really intelligent sort of systems, you got to think about data sets that are not homogeneous, not data sets that are normally mixed together, like EMRs and maybe social determinants of healthcare data, but data sets that are orthogonal to each other, that don't usually get mixed together. And because of the multimodality and the sophistication of models today, we can mix things that have nothing to do with each other, and that's where you break the math. That's where you get 1 + 1 = 3, as opposed to 2. So that's just some of my thoughts from a sort of a practitioner point of view. I'm happy to get into control and ownership and property rights and human rights, et cetera, but maybe we discuss that later on.
Well, we'll touch on that a little bit later, but Emanuel, anything further to add onto that? Because my next question is going to go into this: what is Web3, and how are we really integrating all of this into what is currently theoretical with Web3, but like Web2 is doing all of this for us already, and I kind of feel like social media platforms have kind of led the way in terms of really maximizing and capitalizing on these algorithms. How are we using that in a healthcare system? Because Richie, to your point, what you said was, it's great that you can give me a notification for XYZ, but it has to be at the right time, in the right moment, the right patient, the right treatment, right? All of those things need to kind of happen in order for that data point to be add value, that return on investment for me when I'm seeing a patient or whatever it may be, right? Are there other examples that you can point to on how we can leverage the unused data, right? Like EMRs develop a lot, create a lot of data, but a lot of that data goes unused after a certain point in time. What are we doing to maximize and leverage those data points behind the scenes?
I'll take a stab.
Yeah.
So a lot of artificial intelligence so far has been like the backseat driver. You guys know what a backseat driver is? Somebody who's sitting in the back, right? Telling you where to go when you already know where to go.
Right.
And that, to your point, and sort of what I introduced, is it's just not useful, right? Where I think the value is where you get to artificial instinct. If I stick with that driver metaphor for a second, the things that I really need from the backseat driver is a bolstering of my instinct to operate the car, because I saw another car coming. I saw the lights going red, right? I saw a deer cross the street. It's my instinct that I really need help with. An instinct is something that is innate and many times imperfect. And I think what is great about the wave of artificial intelligence that's here now, and the chatbots are a good example, is that suddenly imperfection is not a problem. And I want to address this for a second because I think it keys in on something that may be useful. AI 10 years ago was a really complicated system that you had to download with 82,000 buttons to click, and you need a really fast computer and 2 PhDs to understand what you're doing. But everything was absolutely precise. Whatever outcome you got from it was precise, okay? Today, if you look at AI, and I think what OpenAI did was brilliant, the model and the token count is interesting, but what's really differentiating is how they packaged the technology, where they took the weakness of having imperfection and turned it into a strength, where you're having a chat with something that is not perfect on return. And that's where you see it goes from kind of that backseat driver to a little bit more of the things that you don't know that you don't know. And that's the opportunity for AI, for healthcare. Now, that comes with the price of, by design, if I'm going to give you something that's a little bit beyond the backseat driver and closer to intelligence, it's going to be a little bit more imperfect, right? And so how much you use the instinct that you get, the artificial instinct, and how much value you give to it comes to a last mile judgment call that has to be used, that has to be applied from the human. So if you have a healthcare provider who believes that what's coming from AI is gospel, you're in trouble. But if you have a provider that understands that what you're getting is instinct, okay, and then you apply your own judgment at the last mile, that's only the way it's going to work. You always have to have that human applying judgment at the last mile. And so when you think about hallucinations are not bad, because if we didn't have hallucinations, we would be back in the old paradigm, which is I'm only going to tell you something that I'm absolutely sure about. And by the way, you need to rejiggle the flux capacitor 86 ways to be able to get that answer. So by definition, the nature of having imperfections is where the hallucinations come in. And hallucinations have a naming problem. They're not hallucinations. The AI doesn't make a thing. It's an issue of confidence. So this is statistical probability in steroids, right? So if you ask a model, what's the color of the sky? It's going to say blue, because that's the token that appears the most after that question, which is blue. But if you asked it, what was the color in the sky at night? It would say black. Where I think we're going to get to is every answer is going to have a confidence factor associated with it. Imagine if an AI came back to you and said, hey, I think the answer is this, but on a scale from 1 to 10, my confidence is a 7. That's where I think we're going.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually want to echo, and our viewers, regular viewers will know that one of the things that Amit and I constantly emphasize is the human in the loop component to any piece of technology that we're using. There's really, whether it is at the last mile, Richie, as you're saying, or within the earlier versions of whatever question or problem you're trying to solve, the human component is absolutely one of the most critical processes in any sort of loop. Richie, so excuse me, Emanuel. So as we're kind of looking at it, to bring our conversation back into the realm of kind of blockchain, how do you envision?
I'd like to make a comment on what Richie just said. I want to kind of add on to the whole AI spectrum, and that is AI currently is going through a lot of metamorphosis. And part of the original, even with ChatGPT, latest generation, it was developed out of almost 45 terabytes of data, and God knows how many millions of dollars to train it. But it was essentially scopeless. It's more of a, and so the whole idea, I'll just go back to retrieval augmented generation idea, is to provide more of a rudder, because the reason that AI is hallucinating is because of the lack of scope. It's just a huge data set. And the idea of retrieval augmented generation is to provide some authoritative rudder, if you will, to a much smaller data set. And the yield is actually much higher. It's very impressive as to how much more information you can get and how much actual data set you need. It can be in the hundreds of megabytes, for example, using this approach. Why is that important? Because you can actually create specific areas for retrieve for AI that are much more cost effective. For example, in India alone, they're trying to transform healthcare education using the large language models along with RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, for frontline health workers, to actually teach them how to understand healthcare better, and actually provide some level of clinical services on the ground. For example, with managing pregnancies, what they call a RAG pipeline, where they create a knowledge base Indian pregnancy-related guidelines and knowledge embedding retrieval, and provide those services, on the front lines. And so these are the kinds of things you can. Um, the other flow, if you will, in terms of metamorphosis that's occurring is the typical suspects that we have today, as we know them, OpenAI, Google, and others, is that we're seeing these monoliths essentially controlling or being quite dominant in the industry. It doesn't mean it's bad, it just is. And so the counter process that's occurring right now is that there are strong efforts to actually decentralize AI itself. And there are newer developments going on to provide more open source and decentralized approaches to providing AI agents and services that can be used at lots of different levels, so it doesn't get truncated or skewed in one direction.
Yeah.
So I
think-
just wanted to add some things about that.
Yeah, I think Dipu,
Yeah.
it's interesting here to parse this for a second. We have to come to terms with whether we are going to think about AI as a technology or AI as an industry.
Hmm.
And this is
Exactly.
a tangent but important distinction.
Right.
And so if you think about it as a technology, you do want to think about decentralization, for sure, without a
For
doubt.
sure. That adds to the security and the privacy concerns and
Without a doubt.
transparency. Right.
But if you think about it as an industry, it's very difficult to find an industry, and I mean something that's substantial, that's a 20-year evolution that changes the arc of mankind, that was built on a decentralized pattern. There are supply chains in industries where on the left side of the supply chain, which is sort of the more fundamental of the capability that's needed to drive that industry. If we think about electricity, for example,
Right.
where
What are
you
the
do
blocks?
need centralized providers that can leverage the economies of scale to be able to bring the price down, to be able to get someone that can then package it and then productize it and then personalize it and then service it. And so you almost see that supply chain going from a few to many as you go from left to right. I mean, imagine if electricity was decentralized and there was 36,000 electricity providers in the US. Right? There would be no efficiency of scale, and a kilowatt of electricity would be so expensive that it would be almost impossible to blow dry your hair in the morning. So
Oh my God.
this is where, when you think about it, as
What a
an
world
industry,
that would be.
Oh my God. I don't know if I could
Right?
live in that world.
this is it. This is it. Where if you think about it as an industry, oh my God, I hope we have a few big providers that can deal with the massive workload, the massive infrastructure, the massive energy consumption that's going to be needed, the massive scarcity of silicon that's going to be needed, the massive provisioning of data that's going to be needed to be able to drive that cost down to virtually zero so that we can have an industry that actually evolves, right? Now, that's counter to the thought of decentralization. And this is where regulations and best practices come in.
Yeah.
The challenge with AI is that it has the same characteristics of things like nuclear fission, which is it has great potential and insane risk at the same time. And so this is where this intentionality to have this discussion so early is needed. And I think we're doing a fantastic job at managing the downside risk when you compare it to the work that we did with the internet. We barely had conversations about accountability in the beginning of the internet. We didn't know that there were unintended consequences of the internet. Whereas with AI, we're having those conversations today on day zero. So decentralization of artificial intelligence to me is almost the counter intuition of an absence of the awareness of industry.
Right. Does that not touch upon the edges
However,
of what Web3 is going to be, right? Like when we talk
yeah.
about it, right, in theory. Oh, go ahead, and then
However, I think you do need that dynamic. I think absent the other side, there will be no balance. And I do think in order to have that balance, you do need the decentralized approach. And I think Richie rightly points out the practical aspects of the other side. You do need the scale to actually get things done. You do need the financial wherewithal to actually spend the money to do the research. And so now we have to look at this a little more philosophically, that this is inevitable, and we should have that dynamic dialogue about what are the, not only what are the guardrails around this, so it doesn't become a out of control, Web 2 social media event again.
right. I was about to give that example what you were talking about, because it's true. The internet created social media, and we really didn't pay attention to it until it was too late.
Richie's absolutely right about that. So is there one answer? No, but I do agree with Richie. You can't just get religious on these things about decentralization.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, go ahead.
I want to comment on Web3 for a second. Sorry, Emanuel.
Sure. If you could define it for us, Richie, in your and then how it kind of applies to what we're talking about at a larger scale for blockchain and AI and its interoperability within healthcare.
Yeah. So there's only one web.
Right.
and I haven't gotten Web 2 as yet, by the way. If you guys have Web 2, please tell me how to get Web 2. Because I don't understand. And by the way, if there's Web 3, why not do Web 8?
Well,
right?
Web 3 is theoretical for our audience.
There is no such thing as Web 3. There is no such thing as Web 2. There's only one web. And what we're talking about is the majority of design patterns of the various apps that are built on the web.
Right.
And the design pattern of the major apps that are built on the web today is user-generated content that is low efficacy, low transparency, low governance. And all of that comes with things like unclear lines of ownership, unclear lines of control, unclear lines of lineage, right? And the pattern that we should go to is apps that are built on the only web that we have, that has more accountability built into it around control, around ownership, around lineage, etc. So sorry for the contrarian point of view, but if you guys know where Web 2 is, please tell me, because Web 1 that I have sucks a lot. Okay?
I mean, yes, I generally agree with you, but the common terminology is that we are currently operating on Web 2, which is and Web theory is the theoretical next iteration of what our current platforms and apps and technology is running on. Well, so just to kind of clarify that I appreciate your contrarian viewpoint, but to kind of give our audience who may not know that there is only one web, but we're working on 2 is the current operating kind of platform, to simplify the terms for people.
It's not an exact term for sure. And it's more of a description for a digital transformation of the current web towards more security and more of the ability to control your data if possible, at least the possibilities there. It's a cookieless environment. No more cookies, no more intermediaries. So automated processes, smart contracts are doing a lot of work. And so it's a direction, is what I would call it. And I also have some difficulties with all these artificial names that pop up.
Like
Out of
hallucinations.
some of these consulting organizations. I don't know where
Hallucinations
they come
are a
from.
very human thing. Not
the
a
same way.
Hallucinations,
Yeah, I think-
hallucinations are just, answers that have a low statistical probability. It wasn't
Yeah,
made
and it's a
up.
very human term that is being applied to a technology.
Yeah, but it emanates a level of fear that's unnecessary, right? I do want to touch on data sovereignty a little bit, and data ownership and data control.
Okay.
You will find, and I spent about 3 to 4 years of my career only on privacy, just privacy, all the way across the UN to consumers to large organizations, just privacy. And you'll find 3 things. One is, and I'm happy to provide the data for this, consumers don't care. Consumers absolutely do not care about privacy. And that's a combination of hedonism, in that, that you don't feel the pain today. Like we wouldn't even eat right to manage our health appropriately. We wouldn't work out to manage our health. We wouldn't
As a society, we don't.
Yeah. What are the chances that we're going to do something about our data that will create the problem 10 to 20 years from now? Just consumers do not care. Absolutely. Now, there's a small community of what I call the tinfoil hats. These are the people that have bunkers in the basement and, the sliders on the camera and all that type of stuff. And yes, that community is there. Those are equivalent to the people who work out a lot and they have, plant-based diets. There's obviously a part of our community that is not as susceptible to hedonism, but consumers don't care about privacy. Second is,
partially disagree with you before you go there. I don't think it's that they don't care. I think it's that they're not well informed, and we have done a poor job.
No, they're well informed.
You would think so?
At least in the U.S. At least in the U.S. There's nobody in the U.S.
disagree.
that doesn't know that they're being micromanipulated and targeted with social media, and that what we call Web 2 was used to collapse the political system of the country, and that every time you look for a sofa on Overstock.com for the next 3 weeks, that sofa travels around the internet. There's not a single consumer in the U.S. that's not aware of privacy concerns. It's not an education issue. It's a hedonism issue, and I've dealt with this at hand. Okay. Second is, the reason why organizations are able to get away with the work that's being done to abscond the regulatory things that are in place, such as HIPAA in the US, it's all hidden behind one button, literally one button. The button is called the I accept button.
Right.
The I accept button is the culprit of this entire thing. And that's because nobody can read a legal contract to understand what's in there. And nobody wants to put a legal contract in there.
This is what I'm saying, is that they make it so that you don't want to read it, I think.
Right.
That's where the ill-informedness comes from,
Well, we know what's happening, but we don't want to do the work to read the contract.
Well, I mean that's true for every patient who you've ever told to lose weight because they're going to become diabetic and hypertensive. I mean, I think that's a human psyche kind of.
Contracts are not even understandable.
Right. Well, and the third thing I'm going to say, so
I will say, I have tried to read those contracts before I hit accept, and I'm like, after the third paragraph, I'm like, I don't even know what they're asking.
So the 4 years that I spent on this, the work that I did was to use natural language processing and neural networks against 10,000 business to consumer contracts to be able to read it and extract the actually negotiable clause, to turn it into a set of sliders that were simple, like red, yellow, green for privacy. And if you're green, you're giving up all your rights and the service is free. And if you're red, you're keeping all your rights and you have to pay for the service. 92% of consumers that we did the study on chose red, gave up all their rights, and wanted the service for free.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
So even if you could read
Free
it,
is everyone's favorite F word, Richie. Like, it's really gotta be the
exactly. Okay.
But that is an old business model.
I was gonna say how. So actually, we're gonna be wrapping up in a minute or two, Emanuel. That leads me to the question that I think I wanted to close with is, we've talked about the challenges a little bit. How do you see this industry kind of in the next 5 to 10 years shifting gears and creating new business models? Because what worked previously is not going to work from a business strategy standpoint and a healthcare standpoint going forward. And I think blockchain is going to be at the core of a lot of these decisions that organizations are going to end up making in terms of truly valuing patient engagement. Because as we said at the top of the hour here at the beginning of our podcast, is that patients are really going to be in control of their data. Although to Richie's now most recent point, they don't know and they don't care. But I think it's going to change, don't you think?
Well, I think Richie is right, based on the history thus far. However, as we see what's going on today, it's almost like a perfect storm forming. You know, we're all guilty of accepting all the things that Google gives us for free, using Gmail when we know they're reading our mail. And God knows what's happening to the content of that mail. However, I think as more and more problems are beginning to happen at all levels, there is an increasing consciousness about the perils of doing so, and not to the point where we're going to move the needle dramatically from what Richie has found through his neural network. However, if you provide different types of incentives for everyday users to basically own their own data and actually market it and make money out of it in terms of a new business model, that tide will change. I think the economics of that, well, I shouldn't be so definitive. That may change, because there will be a personal incentive for them to bring in, extra revenue for themselves, or actually selling it to someone who's been profiting from it for a very long time. This includes all the EMR companies, includes all the health institutions in healthcare, includes all the middlemen who basically broker data. That's a $3 trillion business that consumers are totally left out of. I think once they realize they could actually make real money out of it, no, the whole mentality may change. I'm not saying it's definitive or will happen, but all those things are happening, and those services are being provided for free because these organizations are making a lot of money out of it. There's no question about it, through marketing, through selling, and so on. So in essence, users will, over time, have the opportunity and the enablement of the technology to actually turn that tide around and go in the other direction. So I'd be happy to hear what Richie has to say about that, because
my closing thoughts and last remarks on this. What we're discussing is, and this is why I took it to the UN and argued that we need a 31st human right in addition to the 30 that we have.
Right.
We are a two primary income species. So we have two sources of primary income. We have lots of secondary income sources, But primary income is that we can make income from our intellectual property. Or that's ours, okay? And that came from the statute of monopolies in the 1800s. And then the second is we can have income from our productivity, right? Our labor, and that came from the 1800s and 1900s around labor laws. In order for us to get to the data marketplace or the data economy that's decentralized and inclusive to consumers, data, inherent human data has to be classified as human property, because we need property laws to trade on top of. Just like how you can lease a car or lease a house, you need a lease and a title ID to the data, which is the work that we did at humanity.co. And these things don't come around every 10, 20 years. It takes, centuries for them to come around. So I believe that humans will go past being a 2 primary income species and become a 3 primary income species eventually, hopefully with property rights associated to our activity data. But that we're 50 to 100 years away from that.
At least.
What I see today, at least what I see today, and I will say this, happy to be proven wrong, is the data that we have about ourselves today is minuscule compared to the data that we're going to have about ourselves in the future.
It's not even quality data.
Seen.
Yeah, it's
quality
not even good. Yeah.
If you think about something like computer vision or lidar sensor technology, right? Like the amount of data and the type of work that you could do with voice synthesis to know if someone is exposed to a disease in the future by just processing their voice. We haven't even touched 1% of healthcare data as yet. And that's the opportunity in front of us, because the evolution of the technology of artificial intelligence, as well as the dropping of the price of the sensors. So sensor price is dropping insanely at the same time. Camera sensors, motion sensors, heat sensors, etc. That's where the data is going to become so insurmountable that you're going to have some sort of rights system behind it, because now it has insane value. And that's where I think that the decentralized databases come back in as blockchain.
That's a very interesting concept, and I you have given me food for thought, Richie. Around the 31st human right and how data is going to evolve. But you're right. I think right now the data is not high quality, because all it's telling me is what shoes to buy and when to buy them. And it's not the return on investment that I want as an individual, and it's certainly not the one that is, as a society, the one we want perpetuated, right? We want to do good for humanity as a whole through this technology and these tools. So we're gonna pause or at least wind up here. Harshita, do we have questions from our audience?
Yes. So yes, we have received questions from our audience. So we'll take one question. What are the potential cost savings and efficiency improvements that healthcare providers can expect from adopting blockchain and AI technologies?
Emanuel, you want to take that one?
Sure. I think the use of blockchain approaches, including smart contracts and AI, there are several areas that are ripe for improvement in healthcare. Healthcare is really just totally open to a lot of improvement, as everyone knows. I mean, not only from a business perspective, but also from care coordination, from health education, from quality assurance, in terms of looking at the outputs from providers and actually assisting providers in improving the level of care, the quality of care that they're delivering with the latest information that they may not have in hand. For providers, again, I think there's such a vast amount of information. I mean, just look at a discharge summary, for example. There's so much information in there. It's given a busy practice, it's literally very, very difficult to not only read all of that, although I'm sure a lot of providers do, but to digest it and summarize it. So AI can actually, there are already agent bots that are doing this where they can summarize a huge, vast amount of information in the patient's clinical notes and summarize it for the provider. Is already getting burned out with the amount of information they have to use with the electronic medical records to begin with. So there's there are also AI agents and some people are actually building robots with AI components to assist the elderly
Right.
and nursing homes and other areas. There just aren't enough hands in the world to actually provide the care for 7 billion people.
Correct.
When you think about it. So the things that Richie was just citing are very exciting, and it just energizes you to think how many wonderful good things that can come out of this, not only in the well-to-do countries, but also in the poorer countries around the globe to, manage your diabetes, your, cardiac issues, your blood pressure, and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, and I couldn't agree with you. I will say though, as much as we are going to have cost savings, we do need to invest upfront in this technology so that we can reap the benefits of it.
Well,
and I think
yeah, it's an interesting point. There was a recent testimony before Congress. I forgot his name. I think, see if I have it, Obermeyer, who was looking for biases in AI. And what he found out was fascinating, in that one of the biases that was built in by the algorithm programmers was to actually answer that question: how can it be cost effective? Well, when you look at cost effectiveness, you know that those people with lower incomes and other areas who are actually sicker in a lot of areas are going to just stand out and get biased against as basically costing a lot of money. Well, I think the whole idea is to actually take those biases out and make sure that is not the only parameter for basically determining what is good health
what is
care.
good is, and what isn't. Well, thank you very much, Emanuel, for taking the time and enlightening us on AI and healthcare and blockchain. This space is going to continue to evolve, and we're hoping this is one of many conversations we'll have in this space. Thank you to our audience for joining us live. We will be streaming this probably by tomorrow or then within the next 48 hours on our YouTube channel. Stay tuned. In a couple weeks, we have our next episode dropping, and I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.
As we draw this enriching conversation to a close, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished guests, Richie, Emanuel, and Dipu, for their invaluable contributions and insights. And to thank you. And to our audience, I express sincere appreciation for your engagement and curiosity. Your presence enriches our dialogue and inspires us to continue pushing the boundaries of healthcare innovation. Thank you for joining us today, and until we meet again, stay informed, stay inspired, and above all, stay healthy.